When we moved into the house, the backyard was one of the main selling points. It was spacious, private, and perfect for our dog, Rocky. Rocky's a big German shepherd, full of energy, always bounding around and chasing after anything that moves. It seemed like the ideal place for him. I remember the day we arrived. Rocky sprinted into the backyard like it was his own personal kingdom. My wife and I laughed, watching him chase squirrels and sniff every corner of his new domain. There was an old doghouse sitting in the far back, nestled beneath the shadow of a large oak tree. It was one of those weathered wooden ones with a pointed roof and peeling paint. Honestly, it looked like it hadn't been used in years, but it added a bit of charm to the yard, a quaint little reminder of the house's previous owners. We didn't think much of it at the time. I figured if Rocky liked it, maybe I'd fix it up for him. But Rocky didn't like it. In fact, he seemed to hate it from the first day. Rocky wouldn't go anywhere near the doghouse. At first, I thought it was just because it smelled of another dog, maybe some old scent that made him wary. But it wasn't just that. He actively avoided it. Whenever he was playing in the yard, he'd stop dead in his tracks if he got too close to the thing. His ears would go flat, his tail between his legs, and he'd back away slowly, almost fearfully. I found it strange. Rocky wasn't scared of anything. He was always so bold, so eager to explore. But that doghouse, it was like he sensed something in it that I couldn't. I told myself it was just a weird quirk, maybe some old instinct kicking in. I wasn't going to force him to go near it, and besides, it wasn't like we needed the doghouse anyway. Over the next few weeks, Rocky's behavior got stranger. He still loved the yard, still ran around like crazy, but every time he came close to the doghouse, he'd stop and stare at it, growling low in his throat. Sometimes he'd stand there for minutes, just growling at the thing, like it was a living threat. It was unsettling, but I tried to brush it off. Dogs have sharp senses, right? Maybe there were rats or some other animal hiding under there, and Rocky was just being protective. But there was something else. The backyard never felt quite right to me either. I didn't realize it at first, but after a few days I started to feel it too. This strange, oppressive sensation whenever I was out there, especially when I got near the doghouse. It was subtle at first, just a faint unease, like I was being watched. But it grew stronger, more intense. Whenever I'd go to the back of the yard to do some gardening or take out the trash, I'd find myself looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something lurking there. One evening, I was grilling out back, enjoying the warm summer air. My wife was inside setting the table, and Rocky was chasing a tennis ball around. I was in the middle of flipping burgers when I glanced toward the doghouse, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move inside it. It was quick, just a flicker of motion in the corner of my eye, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. I stared at the doghouse, trying to convince myself that it was just a trick of the light, maybe the wind shifting the shadows. But the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I couldn't shake the sense that something was in there, something hiding just out of sight. I called Rocky over, trying to distract myself, but even he seemed on edge. His eyes kept darting toward the doghouse, his ears twitching. I tried to ignore it, finished grilling, and headed inside, but the image of that brief movement lingered in my mind for the rest of the night. Later that evening, after my wife went to bed, I decided to take a closer look. I couldn't sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of what might be in the doghouse. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out into the yard. The air was cool, and the shadows from the oak tree loomed over the back of the yard, making everything feel even darker. Rocky was asleep inside, and for once I was glad. He would have gone nuts if he knew I was out here. As I approached the doghouse, that feeling of dread washed over me again, stronger than ever. It was like the air around the doghouse was heavier, thicker. I swallowed hard, shining my flashlight on the old structure. The wood was rotting in places, the paint flaking off in long strips. It was an eyesore, really, something I should have torn down weeks ago. But as I stood there, staring at it, I realized I was afraid to get too close. Something was wrong with that doghouse. Something beyond just its appearance. After a moment of hesitation, I knelt down and peered inside. The beam from my flashlight illuminated the interior, and I saw that it was empty. Just a dirt floor, a few old leaves, and a cobweb or two. Nothing unusual. No rats, no animals, no mysterious movement. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. But then I heard it. A soft scraping sound, like something dragging across the dirt. It was faint, but it was there, coming from deep inside the doghouse. My heart skipped a beat, and I jerked the flashlight back up, shining it around the interior again. Nothing. The sound had stopped, but the air felt thicker, more oppressive. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I stood up quickly, wiping the sweat from my brow. I was being ridiculous. There was nothing in there, just my imagination playing tricks on me. But even as I turned to walk back to the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The doghouse felt alive. The next day, I tried to put it out of my mind. I went about my usual routine, trying to focus on work and chores, but the unease lingered. Every time I glanced out the window at the backyard, I felt that same creeping dread. Even Rocky was acting stranger than usual. He refused to go outside at all, spending most of the day pacing by the back door, growling softly under his breath. By the time evening rolled around, I'd had enough. I couldn't deal with the constant anxiety anymore. I told my wife I was going to tear down the doghouse. She was confused and asked me why I cared so much, but I didn't have a good answer. I just knew that I couldn't stand to look at it any longer. Armed with a hammer and a crowbar, I marched out to the backyard, determined to get rid of the thing once and for all. Rocky followed me to the door, barking frantically, but I ignored him. I had to do this. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the yard. As I approached the doghouse, I could feel the weight of the place pressing down on me. That strange sense of being watched. My hands shook as I raised the hammer, but I forced myself to focus, to tear my eyes away from the dark entrance of the doghouse. The first few hits sent splinters flying, the wood groaning under the force. I felt a surge of relief as I tore away the first plank, revealing the rotten interior. But then, as I pried off another piece of wood, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was something buried under the dirt. It was just a glimpse at first, a corner of fabric sticking out from beneath the floor of the doghouse. I stared at it, heart pounding, my mind racing. What the hell was it? An old blanket? Something left behind by the previous owners? I dropped the hammer and knelt down, brushing the dirt away with my hands as I uncovered more of the fabric. A sickening realization hit me. It wasn't a blanket. It was clothing. A shirt, old and faded, but unmistakably human. I felt my stomach churn as I dug deeper, my hands trembling. Then I saw it, a bone. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. There, beneath the doghouse, half buried in the dirt, was a human skeleton. The bones were yellowed with age, tangled in the remnants of decaying clothing. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. How long had this been here? Who had put it there? And why? My thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise behind me. I whipped around, my breath catching in my throat. Rocky was standing at the back door, barking wildly. His teeth bared, his eyes locked on the doghouse, his growls deep and guttural. But he wasn't looking at me. He was looking past me. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my ears, and saw something that made my blood run cold. The air around the doghouse seemed to ripple, like heat rising from the pavement on a hot day. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure, dark and twisted, standing just inside the doghouse. It was barely visible, just a shadow, but it was there, watching me, waiting. I didn't wait to find out what it wanted. I scrambled to my feet, heart racing, and ran back to the house. Rocky was still barking, but I barely heard him over the sound of my own ragged breathing. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it, my hands shaking uncontrollably. For the rest of the night, I couldn't stop thinking about the bones, the figure, the way the air had rippled, like something was trying to break through. We called the police the next day. They came, dug up the rest of the skeleton, and launched an investigation. But they never found anything. No records of a missing person, no evidence of foul play. It was like whoever had been buried there had been forgotten by the world. We moved out shortly after that. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. But even now, months later, I can't shake the feeling that whatever was in that doghouse is still there, watching, waiting. I never told anyone about the figure I saw. I'm not sure they'd believe me if I did. But sometimes, late at night, I dream about it. And in my dreams, the doghouse is still standing, still waiting for its next victim. And I know deep down that it won't be empty for long.